No, you've already been introduced to everyone, so we need not do introductions. I'm going to have a couple questions we'll talk through, but I want you to bubble up your own questions as well. We'll take a pause and maybe some questions from the audience. But we kind of huddled here about what to talk about, and one of the things that came up was the question of how much are humans in the loop? Some of us have heard the term humans in the loop. So where do humans come into the process of text analysis versus machines? Or maybe if your perspective is very human-centric, where can we have the machines in the loop, if you want to flip it that way? So I'll pass the mic down and see what people have to say about this.
One thing I think is interesting about machine learning and humans in the loop is that, at least, for most supervised classification challenges, the first round of that includes extensive human coding. Particularly in biomedical applications like Oksana was talking about, you need trained physicians, radiologists to hand code MRI images over many hours and many weeks. And as you collect hundreds or ideally thousands of samples, you can eventually train these deep learning systems. But if you get those algorithms more and more accurate, you can't get rid of those initial codings or the trained physicians, because next year, how are you going to get your trained data? You can apply your algorithm and get some predictions, and they're going to be as accurate as the algorithm was. But if you don't have a large volunteer pool of these highly skilled, very long-term educated experts to code these images or do the text classification that you need or the labeling to build your NLP, there's no training data to throw in your algorithm. So I think it's interesting that if you look more long-term, we don't really have a solution where you have no humans in the loop at all. You have a lot of human work that then people are claiming, oh, we beat the humans, but you relied on them to do your project.
I was thinking along the same lines. I was going to build on what you were just saying. We're back to the example of advanced care planning, for example. So there's some current approach that is being explored is to build a neural network based on the human coded examples. And this is not something that requires expert, but it requires a lot of time. And the input, the output will be only as good as the input. So the question is how scalable this approach is, and is there a solution to kind of automate this human in the loop activity somehow, or hybrid it with, or marry it with automation to be able to handle bigger quantities of data faster?
Great. I think that as we try to contribute to some of these really interesting challenges, there's this balance to be struck between the agility and flexibility of some of these very evolving latest and greatest, and then the stability and transparency and everything that is needed for sort of the rest of the ecosystem that potential solution sits in. So it's interesting, Nick, that you mentioned, human in the loop and machine in the loop. I definitely have been in rooms where it's more of the machine in the loop question, where there's people from law enforcement who have come up to me and said, Meredith, we don't use technology to solve our problems right now. We use shoe leather. This is our operations. This is the reality of how we get the job done. And unless, as a technologist, unless you can actually understand and empathize with that ecosystem and the holistic design of how your piece fits into this broader picture, you're going to be designing things, throwing it over the fence, hoping that it sticks, and it's just going to flop off the back of the truck, and good luck with that. So I do think that as we're being researchers and designers of these systems, that it's really critical to be flexible about being in someone else's shoes and figuring out at this specific time what is the right mix of human versus machine, and planning for the sustainability and the scalability as we go from a pilot phase to something that is more fully baked.
So human in the loop, a lot of us talked today about annotation of data, and certainly much of that annotation requires humans to give us gold standards, whatever else. This doesn't necessarily apply to historical data, but all of that is guesswork when we are trying to apply labels to text. Whether we have expert annotators or non-expert annotators, these are people who are trying to interpret what is being put down on paper. And they're doing it as a task, as a job. So my thoughts about humans in the loop in machine learning, if I could put them anywhere else in the loop, is the place that they're already in when they're generating their language. Can we find sneaky ways, nice ways to get them to include as well bits of meaning attributed to what they're writing as well, explanation of what they're doing? Could it be integrated as part of the document process or in the manner that you get feedback from spell check or anything else, so that as people create the massive amounts of data that they're creating, in parallel they are as well producing true 100% ground truth gold standards as well?
I think I'm just going to follow Jake's point on the human coding, but I think I realized one thing, especially since I was trained as a computer science people, at that time we were just like think that all the human codings are perfectly correct, and we're just like always seeking to, reaching how humans doing the best. But I think one thing I realized when I translate to the sociologists, humans are not always correct, and there are always a lot of fuzziness, ambiguity, even in human codings. And I think I just want to mention some I think there's some recent developments in the say more like a methodology or sociological methodology literature, which basically trying to incorporate all these errors or fuzziness in the say human codings. For instance, if you have a human coder reliability of 0.8, and a lot of people just discard this that's they're not perfect, but you just discard it and use the labels as your training data. And how should we actually incorporate this kind of our knowledge about humans into subsequent analysis? I think that might be something interesting to kind of relate human coders with our machine algorithms.
Any comments on this from the crowd? I kind of want to dig in a little deeper on this, on what you're suggesting here, Han. Sometimes the machine might do better than the human. Sometimes the humans are clearly going to do better. No matter whether we're using algorithms or we're getting humans to label data, there's a point where we are affecting the data, we're transforming it in some way, and then that data, it becomes the input for an algorithm. And there are questions, social questions and technical and even computational questions about what we obscure when we, maybe we take out stop words or punctuation, or maybe we put a label on something that's less granular than the concept really is. What are we obscuring? And at this moment, at the state of the art, what are the problems we're creating in the moments before we feed data into an algorithm? And I'm going to pass it back around the opposite direction.
It's hard to go first.
This might be my setup. I'm not sure or not, but if you hadn't guessed so from my talk, I think that everything matters when you're looking at text. The question is just how does it matter? So my use of punctuation and space speaks to my personal philosophy and work with language processing, that you can use these objects not just for improved performance, but because they are embedded with meaning as well and functionally behave as the other things that we like to think are meaningful, like non-stop words, etc. So, space is a word too.
Space is a word. That's tweetable. If anyone's tweeting, space is a word.
Hashtag.
Hashtag XD17.
Yeah.
It's a good
Title
title.
paper. You can tweet the title back.
I think provenance is really critical, especially as we're bringing together people from different disciplines who may have different formal training in, being able to leave breadcrumbs. And we do risk, if we're sloppy about this, really obscuring some of the fundamental meaning and insights. I was just at a water data workshop a couple of days ago here, and we like to use the Mad Libs, who needs what data in what format, to make what decision. They have a shortened version of that for passing down the hallway, who, what. And it is so critical, especially when you're speaking with people who aren't as well versed in all of these amazing, fundamental technologies and algorithms, to be able to, if someone asks, well, why did you come to that conclusion or recommendation? Everything that goes back to the original data sets and so forth. So I think, that's something that should be taught and integrated into the practice and practicum for data scientists.
And from the clinical data domain, the biggest limitation that obscures is the privacy protection, HIPAA, and things around it. And it's really, it is difficult. It totally makes sense why the clinical data should be protected and private. And it is hard to work around it. There are certain ways of suggested ways by regulatory agencies suggest safe harbor rules and best practices of dealing with how to make private data into de-identified, but it loses a lot of meaning in the process. It's kind of a balance between maybe some people would voluntarily give up their share their data and be willing to open it up for research. But it's a choice that people need to make who own the data.
I think the more we care about obscuring the outcome, particularly that we're thinking about, I do mostly supervised learning. I think we're currently making it very easy for the algorithms by usually doing binary classification, where we have a concept that's very complex and hierarchical often, that we try to simplify into the easiest possible thing for us to predict, yes or no, probability, output. And I think as we continue on, especially in text analysis where we know these concepts are so complex, I think we'll start working more towards hierarchical predictions, or at a minimum, multidimensional outcome predictions, where we struggled on the hate speech project with how to code hate speech, given there are different targets of it and different sub-themes. And I think for this project and others, we'll start saying, okay, is it hate speech or not? If so, how intense is it? Who's the target? And maybe even instead of hate speech or not, we focus on predicting 5 or 6 or 10 components of hate speech that are currently part of the code book that the humans are interpreting, and instead try to show that to the algorithms and have them try to interpret those different components rather than shielding them from it. It's going to be harder to use metrics and to optimize those predictions, but I think we'll start seeing a shift towards that approach.
I'll take a crack at this one too. I actually kind of appreciate Han's answer, which to me was like, oh gosh, this is really complicated. And I think it's complicated because when we're transforming data, when we're cleaning our data or processing our data, there are actually things we can do to it that change it from the raw data that are revealing and not just obscuring. So in my examples, looking at all these Occupy movements, it's not helpful to me that Ted Smith did something in Seattle and Carly Johnson did something in Austin. If they're both protesters, I want to know that they're protesters, and I want to count them as protesters. So I'm going to go through and find these named entities and figure out what kinds of verbs are they committing and what kinds of verbs are they the objects of, to determine their role in a social interaction. And then I can know that they're a protester, and I have a countable object that I can compare across all these different events. So that's one way of looking at it, that sometimes switching from the raw data to a transformation actually clarifies as opposed to obscuring. But the reason I followed this path to create Text Thresher is because I was very doggedly unwilling to make compromises on how we were labeling all of those news articles about the Occupy movement. I saw what other teams had done, and they would basically have a questionnaire for each article, and they'll say like, what kind of event was it? What was their claim? Did the police show up? Was anyone arrested? And it doesn't get much more granular than that in terms of the activities going on during the movement and the interactions. And from my standpoint, trying to understand why cities behave differently towards the Occupy movement across 184 different campaigns, I was just unwilling to move forward with that higher level of granularity. And you know, thanks to Berkeley, thanks to the D-Lab, thanks to BIDS, which all in various ways gave me these abeyance structures where I could slowly work towards all of this. We're now at a point today where we have a crowd of people who are looking through these newspaper articles and particularly the events, and we're finding this super fine-grained, detailed data that hopefully doesn't obscure what was happening on the ground any more than those media journalists probably already did to some extent. And then when you like step out to that scope, there are other ways to deal with how your data are obscured. So, you know, news media don't typically make stuff up. So they don't have biases of commission, but they have biases of omission. They didn't see what was happening at this part of the protest because they were looking over here, or they didn't care to report on that. So we find data from all these different angles, from different sources, and then we're also building a tool, or we have a tool built actually, that can send surveys to people on the ground via Twitter and have them doing observation of the protest movements. So it's, you know, it's pulling things out of the documents and de-obscuring them, and then doing everything you can to take everything that's there, and then also reaching outside the documents to find other angles on your data. I've committed the error of holding the microphone too long. Folks in the crowd, thoughts on this question or questions for the panel? Someone humorous with a question. Okay. Then one last question. We'll do it as a bit of a lightning round. It can be you can say anything you want. First of all, a wild card is an option. But the question is, what do you see as the future of the frontier of textual analysis?
Two things come to mind. Text summarization, I think, goes to a lot of these things. And second, I feel like, based on Nick's comments, raw audio recordings that are converted to text is really how you eliminate the middleman of the news and tweeting and just go to what was said by ideally thousands or millions of people and then aggregate up from there.
I need to think about it.
So I was on a panel just a couple of weeks ago for that translational data science workshop, and we were asking some of these hard questions as well. I think the future should and can have more of an integration with the end user. And if you're looking at text, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question: who is the end user of whatever analysis or output is coming from that? I think here at Berkeley and at the number of institutions represented in this room, you may have the luxury of flexibility to decide different problems right now as a grad student or as a faculty member that you want to work on. And I would implore folks to consider the so what factor of spending all of that time. I know during lunch we were lamenting that I was one of those grad students as well once and spent a whole year looking into all the nitty-gritty details of a specific simulation only to have that amount to one slide on my PhD dissertation. And so being ruthless about asking yourself the question, so what, who cares, why does this matter, is something that hopefully the future has more of.
I would say sort of two things. One is live originator human interaction, human in the loop, where you've got people who are providing information directly from the ground and saying this is what it pertains to. And likewise, those originators saying, yes, this is my data and you can have it. So now advertisers get it as well as researchers.
I think from a social science perspective, I actually wish to say kind of two kinds of work. One kind of like how text is actually generated, like to link text with our covariates and understand the variations between text and who's actually talking about it. And instead of just treating it as some object itself, trying to link the human who is actually writing about it and trying to understand why and how we actually make this decision to write these things. And the other is like how text actually interact with other things. Like sometimes we just like use text analysis and we'll be kind of trapped. We believe like all people write is what they really care about, what they actually really want to do, but this often may not be the case. So yeah, I really wish to see more works on actually trying to sort of link, like, just like referring to my case, it's just like how people talk about protests and whether they actually, their actions about protests. And I think this could be something that to link text with more diverse domains of regions and outcomes.
Oh yeah, Oksana. Back to you.
Looking at, again, from the perspective of biomedical data or access to clinical data and biomedical from biomedical research, it would be really cool where, to have a technology in place or infrastructure where a researcher just comes to something and asks a question and the machine gives a pretty good answer, already narrow and focused enough to give them a good start and attaches a lot of data ready to go.
I think that's the outcome that kind of all of us want in some way or another. If we can train a computer to have this kind of computational model of what humans are doing when we're socially interacting and what's meaningful to us, we can train them to understand what a question means from a human perspective and then to give a reasonable answer. And I think the future or the frontier of text analysis is kind of everything we've been talking about over the last 2 days. It's the algorithms, it's linking data, textual data with geodata, or textual data with image data. It's making sure that the input to all those algorithms is actually reflective of a social reality that's been well articulated through decades and centuries of social science theory, and making sure that as opposed to getting garbage in and garbage out, we're getting really intricate, dynamic social theory in, and really intricate, dynamic social theory out. And I think this is exactly what will become, when we solve the artificial intelligence problem, it'll be because a bunch of social scientists and linguists and computer scientists worked together through a long pipeline that started with this social science theory feeding into these algorithms and making it possible for a computer to kind of understand reality the way that we can understand it. So thank you all for being here and for bringing all of this knowledge together so that we can look at it and see that we might actually have a future building this stuff together. Thank you to the panel. Thank you all for being here. We're going to take a 5-minute break and break out our tables. We're going to have some of the same MIG sessions from yesterday. We're also going to have some data from the Occupy movement that I'm going to be able to debut kind of for the first time. We can work with it. And some data, I know Johannes is here and Rebecca and Aaron, data on congressional hearings. So we have speech acts from people in Congress, and we're figuring out how to make that a queryable, searchable database so that we can ask questions about how Congress members from different regions or urban or rural districts or men or women or different parties talk about different topics over years and years of Congress. So 5 minutes to break out our tables and maybe a bio break, and then we'll get on with the make sessions. Again, thank you all for being here. Oh, yes, and one last thing. Thank you, Chris. Please go ahead and take our survey, and as long as you can do it honestly, give us some good marks, because then we can pass that along to the superiors. Yeah.
Are the slides for everybody going to be available?
This video, there's going to be a video, and that will be available at bids.berkeley.edu. I guess it'll take a moment to edit it, but any last thoughts, Mom?
I think that we will check in with all the speakers to see how they feel about posting their slides, and to the extent that they agree, I think we can also do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, everyone.